Welcome, everyone, to Facebook Live here. Good to see you here today. We are back again with CEO Secrets. This is Vinny Ribas and Tony Bodoh. Vinny, how are you doing today?
I am amazing. How are you doing, Tony?
I'm doing awesome. Ready for this particular show because we have been talking about this topic for many years.
5 years.
And 5 years, at least 5 years, at least 5 years.
We're actually talking about it. We wrote about it 5 years ago.
Exactly. And the topic we're talking about today are the 13 essential roles in any business. And these are roles that absolutely must be filled by someone in a business, whether it's the business owner themselves or whether they hire someone or whether they contract with someone to come in and fill these roles. But every one of these roles have to be filled. And so let's talk a little bit about, first of all, Vinny, business owners, when they look at their business, what do you see typically happens, especially with small business owners, and why? What kind of influence us to start looking at these, what roles there might be out there and what roles the business owners got to be thinking about?
Well, I think what happens with most business owners is that they know what they're good at and they focus on that, and they sometimes build the entire business around that, which can be great. I mean, that's what you love, that's what you're good at. But you can't do it and neglect all the other aspects of the business that have to be incorporated in order for it to be successful, profitable, and for it to be long lasting. And the stability and building that in and everything, that all takes a very specific plan. The growth takes a very specific plan, and we'll get into all that. But when you only focus on what you do best and you ignore everything else, it's one thing to delegate, and we'll talk about that. That's what we're talking about here in many cases. But a lot of people say, I'm just not good at that, so they let it go. Whether it's the bookkeeping or the marketing or whatever, they just let it go. And and some people are, I'm not going to say that no one is successful by doing that, because some people, word of mouth is all they need and they get to focus on what they do. But for the majority of the businesses, I think that you have to be aware of all of these different roles. You have to understand that everyone has its place in the business, and that somebody has to be cognizant of what needs to be done in those areas in order to not only be profitable, but to protect yourself, to protect the business, to protect the longevity, to protect the integrity. So that's what I find. I think that there's a lot of challenges with business owners, especially solo entrepreneurs, who know what they do well and have a tendency, whether they do it on purpose, they might just totally ignore something, or they just don't realize that this is a major part of what they need to do. They just are not getting involved or not taking care of other aspects of the business.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. And one of the things that I want to reflect back on, last week we talked about the 5 criteria is what we called them, of a brilliant business owner. And if you're listening to this and you haven't watched the one, I encourage you to go back and watch that. One of those criteria were really focused on the future, confirming the future security of the business. And I think the roles matter, not just in the moment and making sure that you've got everything filled so that you get enough cash flow in now and your business can thrive now, but it's also about these future and say, if I want to, how am I going to exit this business, right? At some point you're going to exit the business because you are going to sell it, you're going to close it, or you're going to, pass away. That's just a reality of life. So if the business is going to live beyond you and be of value to someone else, your family or another person that comes in and buys the business, then having these roles filled is essential, because it's part of what makes the business actually thrive and more valuable to the next person that takes it over. So ignoring this in the moment, you might be okay, but long term, it's going to create it's going to destroy value. It's going to limit the value you can harvest out of your business if you were to sell it, or even if you were to try to go public or something like that. Let's say you make that, not a lot of companies go public versus the number of companies out there. But if you go down that path, or maybe you're going to be acquired someday by a larger company, or a competitor wants to come in and buy you out, they're going to look at it and say, well, if you don't have these things in place, is it really worth us doing that? And so I think that's a big piece of it when I think about like all those roles and everything else. If they're not filled, how much of a market leader can you be, or how much of a leader in however you want to define that can you be, and what value can you really bring to the table for that? And the other piece that stands out to me is oftentimes, like in the work I've done in consulting and customer experience, and you've probably seen, I know you've seen this on the side with the musicians and the artists that are not really business people, but they're trying to build a music related business, that a lot of times without having those roles filled, things fall through the cracks. Customers don't get served, bills don't get paid, something falls apart in their business, and really puts them steps back rather than moving forward, where they could actually be advancing their business and growing their business. They miss opportunities as a result of that.
Absolutely. And in all honesty, I mean, we're talking about 13 different roles. It is hard to balance everything. There's no question. There are only X amount of hours in the day. And so that is a challenge for business owners. So is not having the expertise in all 13 roles. And so is just not knowing the people that might be able to fill the roles, or how to fill the different roles, not having the money to be able to fill the different roles. So that's kind of what we have to be aware of as business owners. Is we need to know, first of all, when we go through these roles, we're going to do them in an order that's a sequence, because it's really critical that things build on each other. That's my big thing, is I definitely want to make sure that things are in sequence. But you also have to figure out a way to cover all of these roles one way or another. I mean, I do a lot of it. It's me and 8 interns in my office. That fills a lot of these roles. They are marketing geniuses where I am not. Things like that. So, I mean, there's always a way to do it. It may be being creative. It may be partnering with somebody. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it, but you can't neglect these roles. You have to be aware of what they are and what their roles are, in your business, why they're important. And you have to figure out a way to have each one of them run or managed and incorporated effectively.
And at the same time, they're not all equal either, from a perspective of time that you've got to put into them. Because like you may be able to handle your bookkeeping or get someone to handle that in a couple hours. So depending on what kind of business you run, right? You could handle the marketing maybe very quickly, but maybe fulfillment, especially in a consulting company, as an example, a small consulting company or a training company, the fulfillment side may be what actually takes most of the time. So you're out there 30, 35, 40 hours a week, fulfilling those things. So you're generating the revenue, bringing it in. But then, okay, where is my sales? Where's my marketing? Where's all that going to happen? Right. And that's where a lot of businesses happen to fall down, because they can't grow because they don't have these positions filled. So let's jump in. Let's talk a little bit about we've got these 13 roles, and we're going to go through them in a sequence. So what is that first role that really stands out and really matters to the business?
Well, first I want to say, we're not giving these roles titles per se. We're giving them a summary of what the role encompasses. So the first one is the guardian of the business. And they are the one that sets the mission and the vision. They're the ones that make sure that everything is aligned with that mission and the vision. They coordinate things. They are the implementer. They're the delegator. They have to have the oversight of the business. Now, in most cases, it's going to be the business owner. They're not in every case. I mean, you may have a business owner who hires a CEO to do this stuff, but he is the main investor. He's the owner. I mean, there are different scenarios, so we're not going to say that. That's why we didn't give these specific roles, but usually it is the CEO that falls into this position. And if you're the only employee, guess what? You are the CEO. You are the guardian. And so, not having just for an example, not having the mission and the vision set immediately sets your business up for failure. it takes away that long-term goal and the long-term strategy and stuff like that, because you don't know where you're headed. If you don't know where you're headed, you can't build a road to get there.
Well,
And so,
let's pause there for a second, because I want to, if let's say I'm really good at what I do. I've got a really good technical skill. Maybe I can repair cars, or I'm a dentist, or I'm a consultant, or I'm a good chef. Why, if I have those skills, why in the world would I need a mission or a vision, Vinny? I mean, if I've got a really good technical skill, what in the world does that add to it? I need to make food. I need to fix cars or whatever else, right? What's this whole mission and vision thing?
well, think about it this way. You're a mechanic, you fix cars. That's great. You're going to work for somebody else. You're going to own your own shop. You're going to have 50 shops around the city. You want to start a chain all around the world. You want to be the next AAA. I mean, you can take a skill and multiply it in a million different ways if you want to, or you can, am I going to have employees, or is it going to be just me in the business? There's a lot of different things that you can do with that skill or around that skill. And if you don't think about that, then you end up being that solo entrepreneur who's simply working on cars. Maybe you bought a small 1-bay or 2-bay garage, and that's what you're working with. Maybe you hire one person, but it's very limited. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But if you don't understand that there is more there, then you never make that conscious choice to stay limited. You've made a conscious choice not to know anything, and therefore you've limited, you've not purposely, but you've ultimately limited what you can do.
And it's almost like you've made a decision based on your patterns of well, this is what I think I can do today, without ever expanding your mind to the possibility of what could be. And you might expand your mind and say, you know what, I don't want any of that. I really do just want the 1-bay or 2-bay shop, or I want to do it in my garage or the building out back, or
Yep.
And we're using a mechanic, but think of any business in this realm. I mean, as a consulting, do you want to be the consultant, or do you want to run a consulting firm? Right? It's kind of the same thing. Do you want to be the trainer, or do you want to run a training company? Do you want to be the dentist, or do you want to run a dental practice?
And a lot of this goes back to what you alluded to earlier that we talked about last week, and that is building your longevity in your business. If you're the only mechanic and you get sick, or you get sick of being a mechanic, whatever, there's no value left other than you have a customer base, but those customers trust you with their cars. So somebody else coming in may not have that customer base. So you have to, if you're going to become a brilliant business owner, you have to at least be aware and sit down with somebody. It could be a friend. It could be a friend who's a business owner. You could put a focus group together. We've done that how many times with the businesses and ideas that we've had, and you just you get some other input to help figure out what the vision, what vision is even possible, and to determine, what do I really want the purpose of this business to be? What is my mission? And even the smallest business, I believe, has to have a mission. Your mission is your North Star. The mission is what you decide when you're making a decision in your business, and you need to go, do I go left? Do I go right? You have to have that North Star that says, which one of these is getting me closest to my vision? And if you don't have that, then you kind of make haphazard decisions, and they kind of circle around each other, but you usually don't ever get anywhere. And so even the smallest business, even an employee, could be thinking about these things as far as what the future will bring, where they want to go from here. But definitely, once you decide to put on the hat of, I'm going to be a business owner, mission, vision, the coordination of everything, the implementing the strategies and everything, we'll get into more of those individual roles. But you are the coordinator of all of that. You are the guardian of it. You are protecting the mission. You are protecting the vision. You're protecting the value. You're protecting the integrity. You're protecting your employees, your reputation, all of those things. You are the guardian of the business, number one.
And I think one other piece I want to add to that guardian of the business, which I think is more relevant than ever with where we're at today with, COVID-19 and coronavirus. Businesses have been closed down. In Nashville here, we're going backward as far as I think we're going back to phase 2. So this may be a little dated if you're watching this at some point in the future, but here's the point. All of us know business owners that have had to close their business down, and they've had to make that critical decision. How can I open, or can I even be open? And if they do decide that they can be open, then they've got to say, okay, what is my mission? What has been my mission? How do I continue to provide services to my customers or my clients? How do I do this in an environment where maybe I can't open my brick and mortar location? Can I do this online? What is it that we really focus on? So that mission and vision is really something that the guardian of the business has to really think about, because it does drive how you react and respond in crises as much as just in normal business operations and planning for the future. What am I going to do right now? How am I going to move forward right now? When we first, talking about this idea, we were looking back to like 9/11 and 2007, 2008, and how companies reacted. But now we're in an entirely different crisis, which is part of why you and I decided to do this series, because we've taught this before, and we've had other people, train them on this. But we said we need to revive this because it's something that people need to know right now. So let's move from the guardian. What is the second role in the business?
Second role is the architect. And sometimes it is the guardian too. If you're the sole business owner, you have to have both of these roles. But that is basically taking the mission and the vision and turning it into a reality. So how are we going to build the business? What exactly are we going to do? How are we going to grow the business? How are we going to monitor the growth? What systems do we need to develop? What systems do we need to implement? All of those kind of things, the operations part of it, that is all part of being the architect of the business. Sometimes it is the CEO. Sometimes it is the guardian that can do both of those. Sometimes the business owner is nothing but, I don't take that the wrong way. The business owner's main role is to be a visionary. And then they bring in other people to make everything happen. I like to use this example. You don't need to be a doctor to open up a medical clinic. You just need to say, I want to open up a medical clinic. Now let me go find the people and the money to do it. And find somebody who's got the license, who's got the expertise. You don't have to be the doctor. You can be the visionary. But somebody has to be the architect. Somebody has to know, this is how we're going to build this. This is how we're going to operate. This is how we're going to ensure that we're profitable, et cetera, et cetera.
So the architect is the person who kind of takes this vision, these ideas, and finds the way to bring them into form. It's almost like, let's use the example of a factory. We want to take this wood and turn it into tables and chairs, right? So the architect is the one who says, hey, we need to have machines that saw and plane and sand and fit things together, and we need to have the screwdrivers or whatever else, right? It's like the architect is the one. They don't create the product, but they create the systems of the business. They envision what that looks like and then put them into real form that can take place. And so in the world we're living in today, where a lot of our businesses are really based on intangible things like intellectual property, or we've got, it could be software, but it may not be software. It may be the way you train people, the way you consult for people, the way you do certain things. Even businesses that have physical products, like let's take a retail store, a furniture store, right? Let's going to stick with furniture for a moment. There is, okay, we've got to have the furniture coming. Maybe we make our own furniture. Maybe we buy from other people and we label it, with our brand. But there's the architect's got to think about, okay, we've got store design. We've got the experience design. Like, how do we, when people come into the store, how do we want them to feel? All of those types of things come into play with the architect here. They may not design the very specific details of every little interaction, but they are taking that vision to a manageable level that then the other roles can start to take their proper place. And that's why you see the sequencing from the guardian who creates the mission and vision, if you will, to the architect who then says, okay, let me take this idea. It's like if you had an idea for a home and you say, gosh, I want to build a new home, you're the visionary, you're the guardian, you're saying, this is what I want to do, but you've got to go to an architect to get that home designed, right? What is it actually going to look like? Let's draw some blueprints out. And that's what the architect does in the business as well.
Absolutely. And as the guardian, you're protecting your vision of what that house is going to look like, so they don't change it to something that you don't want it to be. So that's a good example. I think it's critical to understand what your strength or your weaknesses is when it comes to being the architect, because not everybody can design the most effective system. You might be able to get somebody to come in even for an hour and just look at, I mean, I do this with coaching. You and I do it with speed coaching, laser coaching, where in an hour's time, we're looking at somebody's processes or their business and saying, what if you did this? Did you know here's a technology that would help you? Here's a software that would help you. Here's a web page that would help you, or a tool. Here's a person that can consult you on this. And helping somebody to feeling like just because you're the CEO, you have to be the architect could be a good thing, because if you know enough about it, but it could be devastating if you're not really the one that is the expert in being that architect. So part of all of this is knowing what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, knowing how much time you have to devote, because there's going to be times when you're really good at this, but you don't have the time to do it. And that doesn't mean might mean that you shouldn't be doing that. Even though you're really good at it, you could be great at bookkeeping, but that time maybe is better spent you being something in a different role. So being the architect might be something that you're great at, but if you're not, you definitely have to have somebody that at least is advising you, if not actually hands-on building the systems, or finding a system that already works. This is already in place. Don't have to do anything. You're just adopting the system, but that's all part of the architecture.
And you may not even, it may be more than one person. Think of this as a role. So it's something that has to be filled. And I'm thinking like right now, a lot of the companies, a lot of the clients that I have, they have someone that's been playing that role as an architect. But when we got hit with the COVID-19 situation, having to close down, having to rethink their businesses, they reached out and said, what do we do? Because the architect that they had in place, the people that were filling those roles for them, were not stuck, but they were thinking about business. They were really good at designing a business that they had, but now they're facing a situation that's very different. So they needed an outside perspective. So as you said, you can bring someone in for an hour, for a few hours. You can just come and take a look at my business. Maybe you've got a group of a board of advisors, which we talk about at another point in time, but maybe someone from the outside can give me a perspective. So the architect is a really critical role to play, especially when times are fluctuating. Yes, very fast-paced change. We need to be aware of that. Okay, so what is the third role, Vinny?
The third role is the team leader, and this may sound kind of weird if you're the only employee, but you actually do have teams, and this basically means you're the people coordinator in a lot of ways. You have customers. And we should, I guess, first just define a team. And a team is any group of people who have a like mindset, a like interest, a like relationship with your business, who as a group can have some kind of influence. It's not one individual that you're trying to please, but if you've got a lot of customers that are in this situation, you want to please them, and you may want to get their input before you decide what they're going to like. And so if you have employees, they are a team. If you have customers, they are a team. These are all people that you can tap into. If you have managers, they're a team. If you have investors, they're a team. If you have a board of directors, they're a team. you have so many different, even all your vendors are a team, because there are times when you might run into financial trouble and you can go to your vendors and you get one on board to give you a break over here, and you go to this one, and you get them talking to each other so that they can help each other help they can help each other help you. I mean, there's ways to utilize teams in ways that most people don't normally think about, because they don't think about how many teams they actually have. And so somebody has to be that team leader.
I think one of the most interesting things, and I used to think this way, and I had to, when we were having this discussion, it kind of blew my mind when you first introduced this idea to me probably 10 years ago. And so I was in the very early days of my business. What struck me is that I would say, I'm a solopreneur, because at that point, that's what I was. And now I look at my business entirely differently. I'm look around and say, okay, let me look at all the different teams I have working with me, and I'll give a couple examples. You and I and your wife have partnered up in LeaderBridge, right? And that's the company that we do this type of training through and we've written a book together. So that book is we've teamed up to write that book. We're co-authors there. We've teamed up to create different product training programs and things like that, to do different workshops together. So there's that element of it. Behind me, my other books that I've got here, those I did that with co-authors. But it's like I began to realize and look around me and say, you know what, I don't deliver all of these things. I'm not a solopreneur. I may be the only one officially in my business in those early days. But the reality was, I had companies that were providing my website for me. I had companies that were providing all kinds of services for me. And the more I began to say, actually, I'm just the team leader of all these other people who are helping me deliver the services I deliver to my customers, to my clients, that changed my perspective, because it took a weight off my shoulder, where I could literally start to coordinate and to delegate to them instead of having to do it all myself. And that's such a profound thing for a business owner. And like I said, even if you're a solopreneur, so we're talking about, even let me go to an extreme here, because we usually don't talk about like network marketers or MLM, right? But even as a business owner there, you think about it, you have an entire system. The company that you're a network marketing partner for, they have systems upon systems and customer service and everything else supporting you. They've got product development there for you. They've got all these things there for you. So you're never alone. The business owner that says, I've got to do it all myself, is deluding themselves. And it's a very dangerous place to be. It's a dangerous delusion to have, because one, either you're narcissistic or you're overwhelmed. It's one or the other. No one has ever built. Bill Gates did not build his company alone. Michael Dell did not build his company alone. Steve Jobs did not build his company alone. You have to have teams of people involved in some way. They may not be your employees, but you've got to have teams of people there.
Yeah, you have to look at everyone who interacts with your business as part of a team. Your vendors are all part of a team. Your service providers, your marketing people, whether you're doing newspaper advertising, then you've got a team of people there that can help you to design things and everything. And so the goal of the team leader is to coordinate these things, to identify the different teams, to get them working together when they're supposed to be working together, to use them as consultants, to use them to implement things or to speed things up, to use them to get introductions to other team members. I mean, somebody has to be the people person when it comes to your business. And even if you're a solopreneur, like you said, I mean, if you're in business, you have customers, and you have to. They are a team, because you need to please a group of people, and so using them for feedback, which is obviously what you do as a customer experience expert, is looking at them as a team. As a group, what is it that you want? As a group, how do you feel about this? What is your experience with this? So identifying the teams, knowing who they are, getting them to work together, bringing them together for a strategic meeting, even if it's, I want to bring my somebody from my marketing over here and somebody from over here, and I'm just going to buy them lunch and we're going to ask them some questions and mastermind for a little bit. That's a team.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have a team of teams.
Absolutely. And the point of the team leader is really to coordinate and delegate. Those are kind of the two key responsibilities, to kind of have this perspective of what's all happening out there. They may not have to know the details, but like they have to know what's happening. Where might I need some additional people to come on board? Where are we having some challenges, or where do we have some opportunities that if we had the right people, the right team in place, the right members on the team, we could move it forward. So just a quick shout out here. Have a lot of people jumping on here. Chris, Mike, Sid, John, a few others here as well. I only see a couple of your names, but I know there's more of you out there. If you've got questions or you've got thoughts, go ahead and drop them in the chat box here so we can, answer your questions as we go along here. So let's move on to role number 4.
The implementer of customer experience. And I will let you carry that one.
Okay, so the implementer of customer experience, and we focus on this first, really, before we get into any of the other deeper level roles within the organization, is because we live in an economy that's been so focused on experiences. If you think about it, yes, we have products and yes, we have services, but so much of our economy is driven right now on the experience people are having. Are they satisfied? Are they enjoying your product or service? Is it making life easier for them? All of those types of things, right? And I will tell you that we are in a transition period now. We're moving beyond just making memories and keeping people happy, which is what the experience economy is focused on, to a deeper level where people are seeking out a series of experiences, or a logical, step-by-step approach to having experiences that transform them. So that is really deeply about customer experience. So even before you design the product or service, you have to think about, people are here, our ideal customer is here, and our ideal customer is someone that we can make successful. We can help them to achieve their goals or aspirations in life, right? Or in their business. So they're here now. They've got to get here. What steps do we need to take them through? That's what the implementer of customer experience really focuses on, is how do we move people from where they are to where they want to be, what they want to achieve in life or in their business, what the goals do they have to, what outcomes do they want to achieve. So that's really what this is. So the architect might be designing the business, if you will. The implementer of customer experience is looking at it from the customer perspective, saying they want to be moved from point A to point Z. How do we do that? What mindset shifts, what emotional shifts, what has to happen for them in life? What do they have to overcome, achieve, accomplish for that to be the case? That's really what the implementer of customer experience is focused on.
And it's so critical. I think so many business owners go backwards, where they develop the products and services hoping that the customers are going to love it, or believing that the customers are going to love it, without getting their input, without understanding the market completely, without thinking about the journey, the customer journey, and how you're going to move people from one level to the next. In some cases it's a sales funnel or whatever, but once you get a customer, what do you do with them from there? How do you follow up with them and everything? And making sure that you're not bombarding them with emails and sales pitches. And this, I mean, you are trying to form a partnership with your customers, and that way they are with you for the long term. And you have to design an experience for that. That is not something that's just going to happen because you have a nice product or a nice store.
No, the key thing you've got to look at is how am I, as a business owner, if you will, or the person in this role, how are we creating value in this person's life? You don't say, okay, I've got a great product, so it creates value. You've got to look at value comes from people moving in a direction, moving toward a goal, and feeling as if they've achieved something, and really achieving that thing, right? There's the perceived value of like, oh, I could achieve it if I do this, right? That's important. That's what gets them to buy. But then there's got to be the real value on top of that of like, I really did achieve something, or I really did move toward this goal. And once they feel that value, once they experience that value, they're going to become loyal customers. They're going to come back. They're going to talk about you to other people. So it's the implementer of customer experience is the person who really understands the value the customers want and how to achieve that value, how to deliver that value. And I think that's the really key element of this role.
I agree 100%. And now you'd be ready to move on.
Yeah. So go ahead and take us to role number 5, Vinny.
Role number 5, now that you've designed what you want to, how you want to move your customers, is you can actually start developing the products and services. You put them in place so that they do exactly what you've designed as from the customer experience perspective. You implement your teams. You get them working on this. When we talk about designing products and services, we're not necessarily talking about being a manufacturer and having the products there, or making the products yourself. It could be, as we mentioned under the architect, it could be that you're importing things, or you've got a warehouse of things, or maybe your product and service are totally intangible, but you have to build them around what you decided was going to be the customer experience that you wanted. You can't, sometimes you can force it if you're the only person in the market and you say you have no choice but to do this. And that might work for a while until somebody comes in and competes and says, well, I can alleviate those pains that your customer has. Your goal is to build your products and services so you've eliminated those pains. And so when you're designing your products and services, sometimes, as a business owner and as a solo entrepreneur especially, we know exactly what we want, but sometimes we have a general idea and we don't get focused enough on it. We don't perfect it. We are generalists, but not perfectionists when it comes to getting the product done. We cut corners. There's a lot of things that can go wrong if you don't have somebody who knows how to design the product and services to reach the mission, the vision, the customer experience, to get all of those things, implemented into your business. And if you're not doing that, if you're not paying this kind of attention to the products and services, if you're just saying, well, I'm going to buy the cheapest and resell it, then you're going to get a reputation for having cheap stuff. And that might work. Some stores, that's great. That's what they thrive on. But if that wasn't your goal in the first place, then you're not heading toward your mission. If that wasn't your mission. So the person who designs the products and services has to at least know how to build them, how to put those things in place, no matter what they look like, so that they do head toward the vision. They're consistent with the vision. They're heading toward the mission, and they are, they can fit within the operations. Which is, it's kind of like, what if we're building this furniture, but we only have a small warehouse, and we don't have a place to stock it, or we stack stuff, or we don't have the right trucks to move things, or what, there's so many different things that can go wrong. So putting together the products and services has to be based on everything that we've talked about up till now. And if you don't do that, then you end up kind of just with a haphazard scatter of products and services that don't have a particular focus.
And I think this is a key thing right here. We're at the role number 5, but this is where a lot of small businesses, I think, try to start. And before they've done the other 4 roles ahead of that, they've come in and they said, hey, I'm really good at this. I know how to do this. I've been doing this for all these years, what some version of that, you know, and it doesn't matter what business they're in, they have an expertise of some level, right? And so they say, I know what I want to create. And then knowing what they want to create from a product or service level, they then go back and say, well, if I'm going to create this product or service, what should my mission be? Or what should the experience be? Like they tack those things on, and the product or service is like the center of things, as opposed to the mission being the center of things. If you've got a mission-centric organization, the products and services are there to support that mission. The experience that the customers have, like, in other words, let me be clear about this, not just like they feel good or are satisfied, but fundamentally where you move them, where they are today and where you move them to, that experience of the movement for customers, that can change. If your mission remains the same, that can change over time. I think about the businesses that we're in. You know, we both got businesses that have been around for over 10 years. A lot has changed in that time frame. The way my clients I know in the consulting world had to be engaged in what they needed back in 2010 is very different than the way they engage in what they need today. And, you know, there's a lot has changed, not just with the COVID crisis, but with so many other things going on. You know, technology has changed. What we're seeing Gen Z going into the workforce now, college and workforce. They want some very different things from my clients than the millennials who were going into the workforce in 2010. You know, take for a minute here, Vinny, and talk about what's different in the music world between 2010 and 2020, and how's that changed for your clients?
Well, obviously, I mean, when you're an entertainer and you can't entertain, you don't have physical places to go perform, everything changes. And it's no different than owning a restaurant and the city says or the state says that you can't open. But I find this whole discussion about products and services really applies to artists, because I get so many who are great at their music and they think that that's all they need to be able to be successful, that they will be discovered, that their music will be discovered. They just need to put it on social media and they're going to be discovered. And they haven't thought about who their customers are. They haven't thought about, you know, where they're going to be performing and how they're going to make money when they can't perform, and all these other pieces that go into to developing. They haven't thought about their show, their live show, and how they're going to turn that into an experience that people are going to love so that they can get paid more money. And so it's a very common problem, no matter what business you're in, no matter what field you're in. You know, people, especially in the arts, people are very art centric. That's what they know, that's what they love, and they don't think about the business side. In fact, they will consciously not think about the business side. Mm-hmm. They're hoping that they get discovered. Other businesses don't really feel that way unless you are, you know, I'm going to open up a drugstore on the corner that's a very popular corner and I should be discovered there. I shouldn't have to, you know, do a whole lot of advertising. But it's in designing your products and services, you have to have the customer 100% in mind. And, you know, with musicians, they'll come to me with music that is just not marketable. It's marketable to a very small amount of people, not to a bigger, bigger audience. And then they wonder why they can't get any traction. And it's not a matter of necessarily of changing the music. It might be, but it could be a matter of changing the customer experience. You know, and we're not going to make this a bar band type of show. We're going to put this in a concert theater. And where you get to have listeners. I mean, you have to build your product around who your customers are.
And I think it's important to note here, it's like when we were talking about the product and service and the experience, while we have these roles sequenced in an order, because we believe there's a need to do that in most of these roles, it's important to recognize that they cycle back on one another. It's like feedback loops. So the product designer has to think about what the experience is supposed to be. The experience person has to be thinking about the mission and vision of the organization. The mission and vision of the organization's got to come down and look at, okay, is this really the experience that really serves the purpose of the organization? They've got to come down and look at the product. The experience people have to come down and look at the product and say, wait a second, is the product really designed to serve the experience that we have designed or we want the company to be achieving? And so these roles have to interact, and sometimes and often with small businesses, because a business owner or a small business CEO holds a lot of these roles, or maybe they have a small team, but the team ends up having more than one role. They may have these conversations in their head instead of on a whiteboard. They may have these conversations in their head instead of in a boardroom where everyone gets to kind of throw things on the table and think about it. And while that's a good thing from a speed of implementation perspective, it can be a dangerous thing when you don't pause and put it out there where the light of day can see it, right? The light of day doesn't get inside our heads. We just make a bunch of assumptions and we think about things and we're like, oh, this is a great idea. The moment we put it on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper, or we put it out there for others to think about and to see, it might bring to light something that we haven't thought about. So I think that's really important. It kind of leads us into the next role, which is the strategic developer. Or do you have one point?
I said one more thing. Yeah. As the guardian of the business, as a CEO, your role is to make sure that all of these other roles, whoever's filling them, are coordinating with each other, are talking to each other. Because you do not want the operations guy to design the operations and the product guy to design the products and they haven't talked to each other. It doesn't make any sense, because you're not going to be able to build the product that you want.
Right.
And so as the guardian, you're in order to guard the business for longevity, for value and everything, you have to make sure that all of these systems are the system leaders, even if it's you, are talking to each other. So sometimes it's really good to take let's say an operational problem and turn around and say, okay, let me put on my customer experience hat. If I'm a customer, how does this operation look like? What does that look like to me? How does that affect my experience? And when I'm choosing my products and everything, put on the customer hat, put on the operations hat. Think about it from the person who's working in the store. Is this actually going to work? How many employees am I going to need to put in place in order to do this? And it's not easy for some people to switch gears like that. But if the fewer people you have, the more you have to delegate these roles very, very specifically. You're in charge of this. You're in charge of this. This has to be covered. But also, you need to be able to look at things from look at the same thing from several different perspectives. And if you don't do that, then you end up with just this haphazard, group of maybe really talented people just going their own way, doing their own thing, because nobody has made it a cohesive mission to follow, and a cohesive plan.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, and then we'll move on to the strategic developer. I think a big piece of this is, even if you are a small business, right, and that's kind of who we're speaking to here. If you're in a small business and you're playing multiple roles, one of the things you want to do is you want to put on the experience hat and go through this as just the implementer of customer experience. You want to put on the product development hat and go through it. And you can literally on a whiteboard. I like whiteboards because I think it just allows us, but you can do it on a computer if you want to as well. But literally go through the conversation only wearing that hat, only sitting in that seat around the table, if you will. And there's an exercise that one of my mentors actually recommended at one point in time, where you put your problem, whatever it is you're working on, in the middle of the table. You write it out, put it on the middle of the table, and then you go from one seat to the next around the table. And it may sound like an odd exercise, but if you really think about, okay, let me think about it from the customer experience perspective. Let me think about it from the product perspective. Let me think about it from the strategy perspective, and you go through the different ways to think about it, and you sit in a different seat every time. There's something that shifts in your mindset, and it allows you to see really different perspectives and then bring together in an integrated way the best of all of these, and to eliminate in that integrated way the worst of all of them. So I think that's a really critical part to really consider as we're looking at this.
I agree 100%. Okay, the strategic developer. This kind of has to be integrated in everything. So, I mean, obviously we've got a linear list here. So, we have to put some things in some kind of an order. But when you're building a business, or if you have a business and you're just trying to move forward, if you do it without a strategy in place, then you are linear. You are not. You're going to be flatlining all the way across the board. You're never going to have any
Right.
kind of an upward curve, and it's because we get very comfortable in what we're doing and what we're doing well, and we don't, without a strategy to say, okay, how do I duplicate this? How do I grow it? How do I make it stronger? How do I make it more valuable? All of these different things. Um, you you kind of just get complacent.
Yeah.
And things don't move in any way. And
Well,
you also, and the strategist also has to look at all the contingencies, the what ifs. What if this happens? What if this happens? And here's your mission, and it's way up here. What do we have to put in place to get there? What are the milestones that need to be set? How are we going to get there? What path are we going to take? Are we going to franchise? Are we going to just open up 100 stores on our own, just using a retail, let's say, as an example? Are we going to just have a mega store? Are we going to be in malls? Are we going to be in corner store? I mean, there's so many different decisions that go into it, and it may sound like we'll be there, we'll be everywhere, and that may work. But even Walmart, where you see everywhere, has a strategy of, we want to be within, I don't know if it's 7 or 11 miles of every person in the country. You should be able to drive within 7 or 11 miles to get to a Walmart. And that's how they strategically place their stores. And then what they put in each store is different, because it depends on the local area. So that's all strategy. Being able to determine how you're going to continue to operate, how you're going to grow, how you're going to strategize your whether you need investments and things like that. I mean, all of that. So somebody has to be the one that's setting the strategy.
Well, and I think what's really interesting about the strategy element here is, yes, we're talking about this as rule 6. We talk about a lot of other things. Strategy, as you said, does play into all of these other elements, these other roles, and that. And so there's got to be this conversation, if you will. And one of the big things is that people often, I think, shy away from strategy, especially small business people, because they may be very good, again, at their technical thing, at the element that they're focused on delivering, but they don't think about strategy. And the ability for someone to step back and say, how are we going to do this, I think, is more important today than ever before. I'll use a particular business model, and there's many different forms of this model, but software right now has gone through a shift, and it's almost complete, where we used to buy a package of software, as a small business owner or a consumer. We'd buy a CD and plug it into our computer, and now we don't even download software anymore. It's like we typically will just go to the and leverage it via the internet, right? We're connected everywhere we go now. So those organizations, technology organizations, have had to shift their strategy. So from, hey, we're going to install this on a physical computer at a physical location for a client, to, you get to subscribe and you can pay on a monthly basis. So if you think about that, the strategy change there of, like, pay me hundreds of thousands of dollars, right, to buy a software for life. Pay me a few $1,000s a month to use this software, depending on how large the company is, right? That difference changes everything in your business, because now it's like, well, I used to get $100,000 check here. Now I get $1,000 check a month. What do I do? How do I reassess how my business operates? But you can take a lot of other models are that way. Restaurants, as an example, even without COVID-19, restaurants have had to shift their strategy. So, they built a kitchen that supports, 80 to 90% dine in, the people coming in. But even before COVID-19, we were seeing the rise of Uber Eats and Grubhub and all these other delivery services. So these restaurants, they've got this capacity in their kitchen, but it was designed to serve the dining room. Now they've got this outside, people coming in, so they could have a full dining room plus, right? All these other ways to deliver food to people. And so they've got to rethink, what's our strategy here? We've got to expand our kitchens? Do we shrink our dining rooms? What are we going to do? And when you have a physical location, it takes even that much more thought about it. Do we have to change our menu so that when the food, we're walking, 30, 40 feet or whatever else, delivering it from the cook to the diner. Now we're taking it and we're delivering it 5 miles away. Some food may not make that transition very well. It may work in the restaurant, but it may not work, in the delivery model. So these are all strategy related things that come back to the experience. They come back to the product. They come back to the mission of the organization. And so they all tie together very intricately. And that's why it can become overwhelming for a lot of people to say, okay, how do I think this through? That's why you've got to have a team of people that you're working with. And again, they don't have to be employees. They may not even be paid. They may just be advisors, or they may be experts out there in the industry that can help you think through these things.
The one other piece that comes in with strategy is sequencing. And a lot of people don't think about the sequence that they're doing things in. And I'll just give a really basic example, since we've been talking about retail. Somebody who spends a lot of money on an advertising campaign, got this great sale, and then they get deluged with people that come into the store and they don't have enough product on hand. And we've seen it happen many, many times in all different businesses, including restaurants or whatever. And so something was out of sequence there. You've got to have step by step, this is how we're going to do things. And somebody's got to look at what is the effect of this step on this step and this step on this step. And so it's, I get it with musicians a lot of times when they come in. I just recorded an album. I've got 1,000 copies in my car. Now what do I do? It's like, well, you could have been thinking about that 6 months ago, 8 months ago. You could have taken pre-orders. You could, all these other things. You didn't look at the fact that people aren't buying CDs now in your market. So there's a lot of things that people do out of sequence, not on purpose, not to cut corners. They just haven't thought it through enough. It hasn't, they haven't put it on paper and looked at, if you're a strategic planner, you're going to use a Gantt chart or something, but otherwise just putting it on a piece of paper and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do this month, this month, this month, this month. Marketing wise, this is what we're going to do along that lines and everything. And is this marketing consistent with what we're doing up here? And making sure that, that you don't have any bottlenecks. You really want to avoid those bottlenecks that come from this machine is working really fast, this machine goes slower, and so people over here are waiting for this, or people over here are waiting for this. That kind of sequencing is really critical.
And I think one of the reasons that sequencing is such an important thing to consider is that every company, doesn't matter how well funded you are or how many people you've got on board, every company has limits on their resources. Capital is limited, employees are limited, time is limited. And so if you don't get the sequencing right, you'll be expending resources before you can get a return on that investment. And that's why the sequencing within strategy is so critical. I remember you telling me that story of the musicians that would come to your office and be like, I got 1,000 copies of CDs. Well, hopefully they're not doing that yet today, but 10 years ago that was still a thing, right? And as an example, the book that we wrote, Leverage, we published that as a Kindle book. We actually never created the physical copy. It's one of the things on the to-do list one of these days, right? Update it and do physical copy. But we did it as a Kindle because that's where people were moving to at that point in time. In 2016, they were starting to really focus on the ebooks and that. Today, if we were to redo that book, I would definitely do it in an Audible format or an audio format, because people listen to Audible books, much more than reading the physical copy, or they're leaning in that direction more. People do podcasts more today than they do, reading in that. So you've got to really think about this from a sequencing perspective. It also fits into that product design. Like, Okay, if I launch the book, do I need to start with a physical copy? Do I need to start with a Kindle copy? Do I need to start with a with the Audible copy? You know, those are all things to consider in the strategy and sequencing thing. So let's move on to the next one, number 7 here, which is operations management.
Well, operations management, it may sound like it's falling under the second category there, um, of being the architect, but the architect is kind of visioning the whole process. The operations person is the one that's feet on the ground, boots on the ground, and they are the ones that are figuring out exactly how things are going to work. What's the flow going to be? What are the processes? What are the outcomes? They're looking at the data. How are we going to improve things based on the data? What data are we going to track? They're looking at how do we maximize our assets? I mean, all these different kinds of things that are literally the day-to-day operations of the business. Someone has to be an expert at that and has to be overseeing that side of it.
And one of the keys in this role, I think this is where we make the transition, because before all of the roles we talked about before, the first 6 are primarily mental. They're primarily focused on the mind. Whereas if you look at these roles now, a lot of the roles we're going to talk about now are really getting into the physical, if you will, the actual management of the business, the running of the business on a day-to-day basis. And so the operations management is really where that shift takes place. How are we actually going to do what we need to do in the business from a day-to-day perspective?
And I think it's critical to have someone, whether you bring a consultant in or whatever, but to have someone who knows that side of it, because we have, as business owners, especially those that are creative, we have ideas and, we think we can do it this way, when somebody has already done it before. And there's a proven system. There's a way to do it faster. There's a way to do it cheaper. There's a way to do it more effectively. And only an operations manager who's familiar with those processes is going to be able to bring those to light. Because, for me, there's so many things that happen in the music industry that I am not aware of. But there are a lot of things that I bring to the table for the artists that I'm working with that they're not aware of. And it's, I'm always learning. And nobody can be learning all the time, but you can bring somebody in who knows that side of things and is up on everything, and therefore you're not falling behind because your processes, your operations are obsolete or going to be obsolete before you get a return on them.
And I think one of the key roles of this operations management element is that they become experts in processes, in standards, in replication and duplication. That's one of the key elements here, if you will. This is where the intellectual property of the processes of your business come into play, and they become the real processes of your business. That's why it's that mental, from mental to physical. Okay, let's move on. I'm kind of speeding up a little bit here because we've got a few more roles to go through. What is role 8? It's the financial management. So give us a little background or a little take on the financial management side.
Well, financial management covers a lot of different aspects depending on the size of your business. And it's what happens from a money standpoint now as well as in the future. So they're designing the money flow. They're doing the bookkeeping or overseeing the bookkeeping. They're looking at long-term and short-term profitability. They're looking at income and expenses and making sure you're not spending more than you're bringing in. They're looking at investments, whether it's do we need investors or are we ready to make investments? They're looking at, do we need to take out a loan? How are we going to finance this? How, what kind of capital expenses are we going to take on? Anything that has to do with the movement of money and the growth of the money is under the financial management side of things. And a lot of business owners think of it as bookkeeping.
It's so much more than that, though. It's like it's the, as you said, it's the investors. It's, if you have them, someone's got to invest in your business. Maybe it's you are the only investor, right? But it's the investors. It's the customers because they're making payments to you. It's the the vendors that you've got to pay. It's the loans that you may need to take. If you're trying to float a line of credit. So there's so much caught up in the financial side that if you just look at it as bookkeeping is just a tiny fraction of it. It's like how it's in another sense, and this is kind of the intangible side of the financial. You've got how the money flows, but if you really go back to the principles that we laid, or the criteria we laid out last week in our last show, it's how do you build the value of the company? This is the value is measured by the finances, right? It's not just how much money's in the bank or how many customers we have, but it's measured in what value long term. If we were to take this company and run this for the next 100 years or 20 years, what would it be valued at? That's something that most business owners don't think about unless they're trying to go public, because that's what stock prices are based on, the future valuation of the business. Or at the moment they're trying to sell, then there's the future valuation of the business there. And so that's something that a lot of business owners don't think about. And frankly, because they don't know how, they haven't been trained. So to bring in an expert, even if it's just, a couple hours a month to help you think through these things, is absolutely critical. It goes way beyond just the bookkeeping and the accounting.
Right. And I think, even just having an accountant as opposed to just a bookkeeper, having an accountant looking at your business every 6 months or so, and can be invaluable, and of course, when it comes to taxes and everything, that's all under the financial management side too. And that's not one place you want to mess up, either on either side, where you're not paying the taxes that you're supposed to, and then you're getting in trouble, or you're paying way too much taxes and then you're getting in trouble on your own, from your own side, because you're, just giving up cash that you should have.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to role number 9, training and education.
I think that a lot of business owners totally neglect this, unfortunately. They are very caught up in the day-to-day and getting things done and making the money now. And they don't think about making sure that they themselves, their employees, their management, everybody that's involved, even customers, are being trained and are being educated on how to be better at what they do, or how to use the products better. I mean, there's so many different aspects of this. The who we're going to train, how we're going to train them, where are we going to train them, what method are we going to use? Is this going to be online training? All of these different things. It may seem very like, yeah, that's the last thing I need to deal with. But in a world that changes as fast as we do right now, if you didn't know about Zoom, you learned really quickly. But there are other changes that are more behind the scenes, that you need to know about in your industry, and you need to keep up on that, and your employees need to keep up on that, or your sales staff needs to you need to have constant sales training. You need to have constant HR training for people who are doing HR, management training for your managers. It's not just about training in your business. It's about personal development skills and stuff like that. So I think that there's way less weight put on this than there needs to be in most businesses.
Right. And there's
value can be that you are so well trained.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that there's an interesting dynamic that's happening right now. And again, when we came up with these ideas and we start talking about these, probably 7 or 8 years ago, there's been a shift since then. We were talking primarily about the internal training and training of your employees, your teams, et cetera, right? Or if you've got virtual assistants, you've got vendors, training them on how you want things done. But there's another element today that I think is critical. And this is the cross between where training meets product and service development. And what I mean by that is, if you look at it today, so many of our products require some level of training for the customer. Now, that can be built in as part of your product or service, but you may look at it and say, I do need training for my employees, my teams, all of that. But how do I need to train my customers and my clients so that they know how to use our product successfully? And there's a whole line. So where we used to have customer service, which was if something breaks, customer calls you, we fix it, we give them a rebate, we give them a refund, we send a new product, whatever else, right? That's how customer service worked. Customer experience is all about how do people feel about what's happening and how do we design it so that they have a good experience. But there's a new line, and it's really coming out of the technology sector, is called customer success. And what that means is we know these customers are trying to achieve an outcome. How do we help train them? How do we help them before something's even broken? If we recognize they're not using our software to the fullest potential that they could, how do we jump in there and give them training? Now, that is a product, if you will. That is something that you can sell or part of the sales package you have. But it is also an element that more and more businesses are going to have to focus on training as part of their product stack. So it's like, okay, we offer this, but we're also going to do this. If you think about, I kind of get a chuckle every now and then. I go back and watch some of these shows from the 1920s, 1910s, whatever else. Not the shows, but like the history of what happened back then. And to sell a car, you actually had to be able to, the salespeople had to teach people how to drive the cars. Think about 100 years ago, people they'd be like, oh yeah, I want to buy a car, but I don't know how to drive one. And so they would have to take them, and they would train kids down to like 10 or 12 years old how to drive the car. And then the family would buy the car and they'd use it around the farm or whatever, wherever they lived. But it's so fascinating to me. And today it's like, that's what software is. We buy software and we have to be trained on how to use the software. It's like we buy
the outcome.
Exactly, because we want to get the outcome. So I think training, yes, definitely we've got to look at that from an internal perspective. It's also one of those things that gets cut very quickly when companies have financial challenges, but it's something that you cannot afford to cut. So let's go on to number 10, Vinny, which is the marketing guru.
Yeah. And obviously, everybody knows what the marketing entails in a business. And a lot of times business owners feel like this is either their strong suit. And a lot of people can build a business because they're just really good at marketing. But other people are really good at what they do and they're not good at the marketing part. They struggle at it, they try it, but they don't look at the value of having an expert on the marketing side and what that could bring back to them.
Right.
The marketing side is not just designing your brochures and everything. It's, who are we going to reach? When are we going to reach them? How are we going to reach them? How much is it going to cost? Which method is most effective? Which social media are we going to use? Which, are we going to do print ads? Are we going to do a billboard? All those kind of things come under the marketing side of things. It has to tie into the customer experience.
Yep.
Because you can give somebody a totally wrong impression just from the colors that you use in your marketing. So if you could be really good at social media, but you could be given a completely wrong message. It's like a musician who practices and practices and practices for years and years and years, but they never learn anything new. They just keep practicing what they've done, so they keep practicing wrong.
Right.
And they get better at being bad.
It's interesting. So marketing has the purview or the distance across the customer lifecycle has changed too. So marketing starts all the way from before a person's even aware they have a problem. You've got to make them aware that they have a problem, there's a problem in the world, that they might have this problem. Then, and it's about marketing in my mind is really about shifting the mindset and opening people up to look at what might be possible. And it influences them to think differently, to explore possibilities. But that doesn't just end when they buy the product. The marketing now has to continue beyond that, so that as customers buy products, they're buying lifestyles, they're buying, this is a way of life for me now in many cases. And so the marketing team has to be involved to continue to influence that decision to live that lifestyle. And then as people change and grow, they've got to market them and say, okay, we've got the next thing to help you with the next stage of your life or your lifestyle. So marketing is one of those things that it involves a lot of strategy. It involves a lot of tactics, the very details of like what color scheme, what languaging we do, who are we going after? All of that's involved with marketing, but it all flows out of the things we've talked about above this. It's all the other roles really feed into this one.
And it is so people do not think about, they think about, I don't have the money to pay somebody to do marketing, but they really need to do an analysis of what would be the return if I had an expert that did this.
Exactly.
I think this is one of the areas where people spend way too little money, myself included, way too little money for the amount of return that I could get.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that people just kind of shrug off as I'm going to do the best I can and hope that it catches on, hope it's word of mouth. But, really looking at it from an investment standpoint as opposed to an expense standpoint, will change everything for your business.
Absolutely. And that leads us into the salesman, which is role 11. And I think what you were just saying, why I kind of jumped in that right away, is because investing, you may not be the right salesperson for your business. If you're, a small business owner, you're the CEO, you may have to be involved in the process, but you may not be the best salesperson. And that's where I think also you get a huge return on the investment if you get the right salesperson following the right sales process.
Absolutely. I think there's, sales is an art and it's a skill, and not everybody has it. And a lot of us as business owners feel like that, that is supposed to be our role. It's our baby. Nobody else could sell our baby. And all of this whole long line of roles, often gets diluted and convoluted because of that whole concept of this is my baby. Nobody else understands me.
Right.
But, sales is more than just reaching out to a customer or finding a customer. It's the sales strategy. It's what they're going to say. It's the funnel. And how do we move them through from first discovering the business to getting some interest to, all the way down to being a customer, and then moving them into another bucket that puts them into bigger sales and, upsells and stuff like that. It's tracking all the sales. It's the sales follow-ups. I mean, there's so many different components of that alone for most businesses would be a full-time business.
And, it's interesting. I think we look at marketing, and marketing is really about changing minds, building value. So people look at it and say, gosh, I think I might want that. And then the sales, one of the things that talking with expert salespeople and companies that actually all they do is sell for other people. One of the things that they point out is that a really good salesperson knows how to disqualify. In other words, get rid of all those people who might be attracted by the marketing and disqualify them, get them out of the chain or out of the funnel as fast as possible so they can focus their efforts on closing. And so if you want to understand the difference between marketing and selling, it's like marketing attracts people. Selling closes the deal. And to do that, I got to make sure I've got the right person I'm trying to close. Otherwise, it's going to take forever to close, right? So there's definitely some elements here in the sales process. We've got to be tracking the metrics. We've got to be doing all of that type of stuff. You probably want to have an analytics expert helping you with that. But the sales process is really about taking someone who's basically come to you and said, you know what, Vinny, I think I want to do business with you. That's where the salesperson jumps into the mix. And even today, we're finding more and more that, honestly, in B2B sales, it's true also in B2C sales, but the stats out there for B2B are interesting. They say that a person will not contact a salesperson now until they've consumed 5 to 7 pieces of information, could be content, white papers, videos, but they feel a level of expertise before they even go to the salesperson. And so this whole idea of cold calling, it's not dead, but cold calling may not be resulting in what you want, because people want to go do their own research and have a level of expertise before they have a conversation with you. So in the interest of time, let's move on to role number 12, personnel management.
Everything HR, everything human resources, basically, people movement and, hiring and firing, insurance, compliance, everything that has to do with an HR department, and all of the rules and regulations that you have to have for your state, for federal compliance and stuff like that. A lot of the training comes under this as well.
Yeah, onboarding, offboarding, if you will, when people leave the company or have to get,
Absolutely.
you have to terminate them for some reason.
Right.
Evaluation processes, those all fall in here.
So it's people movement.
Yep.
And again, I mean, this is one of those roles that a lot of people kind of fret over it or don't think about it and don't worry about a lot of it. And it's really inexpensive to get an HR company who knows this stuff inside out and backwards and can handle it for you. Compared to the amount of time that you would spend on your own just trying to look up the laws that you have to have and the posters that you have to have hanging up in your business.
Yeah.
So it's kind of usually an easy one to delegate, and a tough one because there's so much education involved in how to do things right, that it's a tough one to do on your own if you're not experienced in that area.
Yeah. I know one of the gentlemen that jumped on here earlier, I was watching on Facebook here on the side, Jay Hornbuckle, he's got a benefits management company, and they work with the HR teams to provide the right benefits to companies, especially for small and mid-sized businesses. And that's another piece of this. So there's a lot that goes into this. But I like how you said it. Basically, if you think it's human resource oriented or movement of people or the benefits for people, that's what this includes. So we're going to go deeper into these. So don't worry if you're only hearing a little bit here. We're going to go deeper into these as we move into the future. But let's jump into role 13, the last of the 13 roles, called risk management. Give us kind of a brief overview of what risk management is, Vinny.
Well, risk management is protecting the business, protecting your people. And it doesn't mean against bullying or stuff like that. That's part of it, but it is all the things that you need to put in your business to make sure that you are safe. So that is all of your legal documents, everything, whether it's contracts, things are being done by an attorney. If it's, real estate purchases, if it's employment contracts, if, any of that, this comes under HR, but all of your rules and regulations for employees, anything that needs to be, that has to do with legal, especially your sales contracts, your employee contracts and things like that, non-disclosures, if that's what your business requires, all that stuff needs to be done. But it also risk management also includes safety, making sure that you have a safe work environment and you're OSHA compliant if that's what you need to be, or whatever the rules are, or the best practices for your kind of business. It's also insurances. Mm-hmm. So whether it's health insurance, but also business insurance and liability insurance, and you might need errors and omissions insurance if you're in certain industries. You have specific insurances. In the film industry, you got what they call DICE.
Vinny, you're overwhelming me. Here's what you do: you get an expert. You get an expert in the risk mitigation, and there really are experts out there, and that's a key part of this. Like, you've got to be aware of what to look for, but it's going to the experts and really getting their perspective on it. Talk to an attorney, talk to your CPA,
and it'll be more than one.
Yeah, and you'll need to talk to the insurance people as well, because different insurance companies. I ran into this when I was trying to find insurance for my company. I needed different insurance companies because not all of them cover everything, right? And they'll tell you this is what you need, but then you might have a gaping hole that they didn't tell you about because they don't provide that product or service, right? So there are consultants out there that can help. One of the areas that I wanted to hit on real quickly on risk mitigation here is, and I think is relevant from what we've just gone through, risk mitigation also has to deal with, what am I going to do if there's a crisis? What am I going to do if there's an emergency? And it could be, how do I get people out of my building if a fire or a tornado or anything like that? But it's beyond that. What's our emergency or disaster recovery plan? Where's our data being stored? What are we going to do if we're hacked? These are all very relevant things that we've got to consider. And for the interest of time, because we're coming up on 90 minutes here, we will come back to these because these are such critical and important things. But risk management is basically, it is so important. It crosses all of the realms that we've talked about, all the roles we've talked about. And so it's not like it's 13th because it's the least important. It's simply 13th because when you step back at the end of the day and look at your business and everything you've built, how do you protect it? How do you
Right.
keep it from falling apart, or from, if you make a misstep, how do you minimize the damage, the loss of value, the impact of the business? And that goes back to the 5 criteria where we talked about the value today of the business, and that it's making enough money for you today, and also the future value of the business, and having the respect of individuals because you've built a business that survives the crises and thrives. So with that, that is going to wrap up the 13 roles of the business, the 13 essential roles in business. Anything you want to add? Last final word here, Vinny.
Don't feel overwhelmed. The whole idea behind this, in a lot of cases, is just being aware that these things need to be taken care of. You may not be able to do it all today. You may not have the people in place, but you know now who you need to be looking for, what kind of teams you need to build, what kind of processes you need to have to ensure that things are going to go smoothly.
Absolutely.
That's the goal behind this talk. It's not to overwhelm you and make you feel like a failure because you've only covered 11 of the 13 and you're struggling on 5 of them. Because every solo entrepreneur, every small business is going to have it. I mean, you've got 13 roles here that all take expertise.
Right.
You can't be an expert in all of them, and there's not enough time to be an expert in all of them.
And as things change in the world, as we've seen, you may have to come back and reevaluate. You may have everything in line, all 13 of these roles, and then something changes. You got to come back and reevaluate and change. Or someone leaves the organization, leaves your team, you've got to reevaluate and change. So I think that's great advice, Vinny. So if anyone has questions, if you want to follow up, have questions about your business, don't want to post them on here on Facebook, we get that. Go ahead and reach out to us. Vinny and I are both on Facebook. We're both on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, more than happy to help you out. And we will be back here next Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern and 7 a.m. Pacific. I have to slow down when I say that because I get the time zones wrong. Bring your coffee. We'll have another great topic when we come back next week. Thanks.
Sounds great.